What's good guys, my name is Oleg Nikitin, you're watching No Limits On channel, and today we've compared the Sony Xperia 1 Mark III and iPhone 13 Pro Max together with my colleague from ERP Production, Klim. Big shout out to him, and let's get to the comparison. Before we start off, let me show you the specs of both phones, and now since you know all of the characteristics of the cameras, let's compare. Let's start off with the ultra-wide camera. As you can see, the iPhone is a little bit wider, and I have to mention that both cameras were on the same rig system, so the angle of view is identical. Almost. When we crop in 400%, we can also see the sharpness levels. It's a touch more of digital sharpness on the iPhone throughout all the cameras. Of course, we can see a little bit of aliasing on the Sony picture, but overall pretty comparable. Also, white balance is different on those cameras almost all the time, and it's a matter of preference, but you can definitely set manual white balance on the Sony, or you can tweak your iPhone look with customizable presets built into the main camera app. The main camera is 24mm on the Sony and 26 on the iPhone, and in terms of sharpness they are very close to each other. And also the dynamic range is also pretty close. The telephoto camera 70mm on the Sony and 77 on iPhone 13 Pro Max, and we can see the white balance difference. The Sony is a little bit towards warm colors and magenta, and the iPhone is towards more cool colors and towards green. Also, the Sony Xperia has the 105mm lens, which is kind of combined with the 70mm lens, and you can see the difference between the digital crop of the iPhone and the 105 proper lens on the Sony. To my eye, it's not that different. And here's how it looks with different focal length on both phones. You can see how far we can get with both cameras and how wide we get, and the white balance difference once again. And now it's a pretty tough situation for both phones. We shot in the direct sun, and you can see the flare on the Sony is getting red and magenta colors in it, and we see the lack of contrast on the iPhone. With the ultra-wide lens, we see the same situation with the Sony, a lot of magenta in the flare. And also the digital sharpness of the iPhone is looking pretty bad to my eye. This picture really stands out, and I do prefer the Sony picture. It has less digital sharpness and a lot more bokeh, which is great. And the same shot with 105mm lens on the Sony, and this is the real physical bokeh of this lens. Looks pretty decent to my eye. When we crop in, the iPhone looks a little sharper, but maybe it's because of the digital sharpness, and we have a lot of it in the iPhone shots everywhere. When we get to macro photography, this is the ultra-wide lenses, and we can see that Sony cannot focus that close as the iPhone, because iPhone right now has dedicated macro mode, and I have a big comparison with the proper macro lens with full frame camera. I'll leave a link in the description below and in the YouTube card as well. And now let's get to the comparison of portrait modes. Klim said that the portrait mode is a weak spot of the Sony, but I can definitely say it's doing more than okay, but both phones struggle with separating the Klim's hair from the background. In the telephoto portrait mode, we can see that the bokeh is more pleasing on the iPhone, at least to my eye, but the separation of hair is kinda so-so on both, but Sony is a little better. When we crop in 400%, I can see the pixels and the individual pixels on the Klim's eye, but I cannot see those pixels in the iPhone, but both cameras have 12 megapixel sensors all over the system. And now let's make a telephoto shot without portrait mode, and you can see that the Sony's bokeh is much more pleasing to the eye. And also let's make a 105mm shot, and the bokeh is becoming even better.
Some people will use a symbolism.
Also, you can turn on and off the distortion correction on 16mm ultra-wide camera on the Sony. Now it's turned on and the lines are straight, and now it's turned off and we can see kind of a fisheye effect, and you can see how the pole on the right side is kind of curved and the building is also curved. So you can choose between fisheye and the normal corrected image. On the iPhone, it's always with straight lines. And here is a couple of more shots with the main camera module. The iPhone is kind of adding the clarity effect to all of the edges of your frame, to my brows, my eyes, the leaves behind me, and the Sony is providing you with a little softer image, but pretty nicely and natural looking. That is why the iPhone is looking more sharp straight away, but we can add clarity or sharpness to the Sony picture and get pretty similar results. On this shot we can see that the Sony is doing better in terms of HDR. Look at the sky at the left corner of the picture. But overall both phones are doing good with HDR photos. When it got darker we did those pictures, and as you can see the HDR is doing better on the iPhone right now because we can see some kind of white bezels all over the building right there, which I don't like. And by the way, when it's getting darker, Sony is implementing more digital sharpness right now. So now let's get to the night shots. I was using the night mode on the iPhone, and the Sony doesn't have a proper night mode. It does increase the shutter speed and we get slower shutter speeds, but overall those pictures are pretty comparable, and I do see that the iPhone is a touch sharper, but all in all the Sony is doing pretty good in low light as well. Only with the telephoto camera I can see a touch more blur on the Sony because of the longer shutter speed, and the iPhone is pretty crisp. Now let's compare the night mode with this shot. Ultra wide is definitely better on the iPhone, we have less noise. The same works for the main camera module and especially for the telephoto camera. The iPhone is doing much better with it thanks to the night mode and long exposure. Let's get to the night portrait modes. You can see that we don't have a proper shutter speed for Sony. We didn't manage to do it in the proper way and it was blurry all the time. And on the iPhone, my ear said goodbye to this chat. As you can see, it's pretty blurry and not working perfectly. The same works with my hair as well. On this shot, we can see that the white balance is kind of all over the place on both cameras, especially on the Sony, but I definitely do prefer the separation from the background on the Sony, because on the iPhone we can see that my head is kind of not properly detached from the background. On this picture without portrait mode, I do prefer the Sony's picture. We can tweak the colors a little bit and it will be looking pretty good. The iPhone is too over sharpened digitally. Let's continue with the night shots. The iPhone 13 Pro Max ultra wide camera is getting much better in low light, especially with the night mode, and also you can see the difference in white balance. The Sony is leaning towards true colors. It was pretty warm outside, like 3200 Kelvin, and the iPhone is trying to compensate the white balance and make it less yellow. And I still do prefer the sharpness of Xperia 1 because of the over sharpened look of the iPhone. Both cameras struggle from the flares. As you can see, the light pole is kind of reflecting all over the shot, especially during the nighttime you can see this. But the ultra-wide camera of the iPhone is doing better in this term. Here is a little bokeh test, and as you can see, the Sony has kind of awkward shape of the bokehs, kind of stars or something, so I do prefer the iPhones, if it even matters. And on this picture we can see that the light poles are providing us with some purple-ish, blue-ish flares on the Sony, which I don't really like, and I do prefer the iPhone in this term. The night shots look decent on both phones, but we do have less ghosting with the iPhone on the top of the building. Here is the comparison of raw photos. They are already edited and we've messed up with the Sony picture because it was exposing for my skin and we overexposed the highlights and we couldn't recover those backs. But thanks to the Apple Pro RAW, we were able to recover the highlights on the iPhone because it stores much more dynamic range data. And also, as you can see, we have less digital sharpness on the raw photos of the iPhone, which is great. All in all, both RAWs are doing pretty good in terms of color correction and color grading. You can see the before and after in the Lightroom program, and I'm pretty satisfied with the results of both. But when it gets to shooting in RAW in low light situation, the iPhone is going ahead with the Apple Pro RAW codec or format. We can definitely see a lot of color noise and overall noise in the Sony picture, and iPhone is looking pretty decent. And here is the comparison of the JPEG from the iPhone 13 Pro Max and edited RAW. As you can see, we have less digital sharpness, better sky color, more information in the shadows, and overall a pretty pleasing look. And here is the comparison of the Sony JPEG versus RAW. I do prefer the JPEG picture, and I suggest not shooting in RAW in low light situations with the Sony. And now let's get to the video comparison. Both cameras are still on the same rig, so it's pretty close to each other and the movement is identical. On the Sony we can turn on or off the stabilization mode. It's a digital stabilization with a little crop. We also do have the optical stabilization, but it's not doing great in my opinion. And also we can turn on or off the HDR mode, which is working like HLG in Sony cameras. In terms of stabilization, the iPhone is miles ahead. I guess this phone doesn't need a gimbal at all, and the Sony is quite shaky, and without HDR the dynamic range is pretty limited. Flares are kind of the same on those phones, but the exposure changes are much more gentle on the iPhone. And overall, in terms of colors, I also do prefer the iPhone for video. Stabilization on all three cameras of the iPhone is better. And look at this test when I was running. The iPhone is kind of flying and the Sony is getting a lot of jitter. And now we have turned off the stabilization mode and now it's getting pretty ugly. But we've turned on the HDR and the dynamic range is getting much better. The iPhone is still providing us with a ton of digital sharpness even in video, which is really annoying. But the iPhone almost doesn't have aliasing and moire and the Sony does have it.
Yo, what's up guys? So basically here's Xperia one and the iPhone one. And as you know, Xperia has probably the worst front cameras in all smartphone industry. So you can definitely see it. Full HD 30 FPS maximum crop while you're using stabilization, so yeah, there's no point of even comparing.
Yeah guys, basically I'm comparing the 4K 30 on the iPhone 13 Pro Max and also the microphones. You can hear the difference and you can see the difference, and actually it's looking pretty bad on the Sony. Unfortunately, it's not your fault, Sony. I understand everything, you make great cameras but still, it is what it is.
You can definitely see it. Full HD 30 FPS maximum. You can definitely see it. Full HD 30 FPS maximum.
In terms of sound, they are really close, but the iPhone has a little bit more bass on its microphone. During the night video test, we have turned off the stabilization because we don't need an additional crop, and we can see that the dynamic range of the iPhone during the nighttime is much better. But all in all, Sony shows great performance in my opinion. And also Sony is hiding the noise behind the dark shadows.
Put it all on your visa. Mona Lisa bone, Patron in the OJ. Drink to you KO. Any are you okay?
The maximum frame rate of the iPhone in 4K is 4K 60 and on the Xperia is 4K 120, but only in 21:9 aspect ratio. We've messed up the settings a little bit, that is why Klim sent me another 4K 120 clip. And also Full HD 120p, which is so, I wouldn't use it at all. Before we make a conclusion, I have to mention a few things about the Sony camera or smartphone so you can understand who this phone is for. The main camera sensor is IMX557, not the fastest one, but it has really fast sensor readout up to 20 frames per second with eye tracking, auto exposure, noise reduction, which is working by combining 4 different shots. Also, we have 2 great apps, Photo Pro and Cinema Pro from Sony, which allow us to shoot like in Sony Alpha cameras, the photo cameras, and we can shoot on all 4 cameras like ultra-wide, main, telephoto and super telephoto in RAW plus JPEG, and set everything manually, which is great. In all 4 camera modules we have eye detect, autofocus, even on the ultra-wide camera, and also the series of photos up to 20 FPS on the main camera and up to 10 FPS on others. In Cinema Pro app you can even choose the Venice slot, which is cool, and also choose only in HDR 10-bit 21:9 aspect ratio. You can customize your camera in any way, set your white balance, set your exposure, your shutter speed, your ISO, and so on. and even adjust the volume of your lavalier mic, which is injected into 3.5mm jack, and it can shoot up to 4K 24, 30, 60 or 120, or 2K up to 120 frames per second. Also, we have a shutter button on the Sony which you half press to focus, like on the normal photo camera. And all in all, the Sony is more conservative in terms of AI, and we have less computational photography being applied. Only the noise reduction and kind of the night mode with longer shutter speeds. Stabilization in video is turning on and off on all camera modules separately. It's getting better with the digital crop, but still not on the same level as the iPhone. And also I have to mention that in the portrait mode on the Sony, we don't have HDR and we don't have noise reduction as well. Well guys, let's conclude. Basically those phones are pretty different and for different people. If you do enjoy setting your camera properly, doing something with shutter speed, white balance, ISO and working with the photos in post, I think the Sony is a great choice. But if you do enjoy shooting a lot of video stuff handheld and you want straight away great picture and you shoot in a lot of low light situations both in video and photo, the iPhone is looking better to my eye. And the Sony of course is much better without this digital sharpening. I just hate it a lot on the iPhone. So guys, please share your thoughts in the comment section below. Which camera do you prefer and which one do you use? Also smash the like and subscribe buttons if you did enjoy this video and hit the notifications bell. Once again, thank you Klim for helping me out on this video. This was Oleg Nikitin from Russia with Love and No Limits on channel. See you in the next video guys. Take care. Bye.